Hey folks, welcome to Bear Mountain. Today we just kind of wanted to do a video about tomato harvest. It's really kind of going pretty great guns for us. We're kind of in the late season, this being right around the 5th of October, and we're now starting to harvest a lot of tomatoes. Today we went out and we picked off of our 23 plants that we put in, and we got about 28 pounds of tomatoes. This is the fourth picking that we've done on this that has been right around that range between 20 and today was the highest at 28. We've got good weather, it looks like, for the next week or so, so we're still probably going to get at least another 30 pounds off of this patch. So when I start doing the math on this, I just wanted to kind of say, wow, this is a great harvest, because we're going to have well over 100 pounds of tomatoes off of just, well, actually 4 of the plants are cherry tomatoes, so it's about 19 paste and regular slicing tomatoes. So we also kind of planted a bunch of different varieties to kind of see which ones, you know, perform the best. And this is kind of a layout here. When you look at the counter, we've got 3 different types of Romas, and this one's actually the same as this guy here. We had Amish paste, which is a much larger paste, Roma style tomato. Roma meaning it's kind of got an oblong shape to it. It tends to be meatier on the inside, a little less moisture to it. Then we had one called Grand Nero, which is a little smaller. And then this one is a yellow-orange called Saucy Sunrise. And these 2 right here, the Amish paste and the Grand Nero, are indeterminate, and meaning they just keep growing unless you pinch them off and stop them from growing. Yes, we trellised them up. We got them trellised up to about 7 foot, and then once we got about 4 levels, I'd say, of tomatoes set on, we capped the top of the plants by just pinching out any of the growth tips and any growth tips that might be coming along. So these guys still have a few more pounds of tomatoes to produce. They've been very prolific. We were actually quite late because our spring was wet and cold, that we didn't get these guys in the ground till almost the end of June. And we were kind of afraid because we'd never planted tomatoes that late. Usually we plant our tomatoes right around the first week of June or so. Memorial Day, depending on how warm things are. And luckily we've been warm enough this summer, and things have worked out pretty well, and we're still having a nice warm fall, which was something we'd really hoped for. Now the slicers, they're a little different. This big monster one is a Brandywine, just a traditional Brandywine, and it's one of the few that doesn't have an ugly top like a lot of people have probably noticed, and it doesn't have that classic, where it kind of like gets deformed at the top. But we have quite a few of those still out there. And then this variety right here is called Moscovich, and these 2 are also indeterminate, and they're open pollinated, meaning or they're not F1 hybrid, and so you can save the seed from them, which we're going to do. Actually, what we tried to do, with the exception of this one right here, which is Oregon Spring, which is a hybrid, but it's a determinate, meaning it grows into a bush, puts out a lot of tomatoes that typically ripen pretty close all around the same time.
It's earliest, so if you plant it early, it's the earliest.
Yeah, it would be. Its typical is about 55 days, where these big guys here take at least 100 days, and that's kind of what we've noticed is pretty close to. That's really started coming on the latter part of September, so we were pretty close to that 100-day mark. It can fluctuate depending on how your temperatures are.
So you stopped watering these, right?
Yeah, what I did is I turned the drip irrigation off when I noticed that the tomatoes were starting to get a tinge of color to them. So we stopped irrigating at that point to kind of try to speed things along.
How'd you fertilize them?
We used Jadam. So we used the JLF liquid fertilizer, particularly a fertilizer that was, we used 2 types. We used a comfrey based one, and then we used the tomato JLF that we made 2 years ago when they started setting fruit. That was to kind of hopefully between the comfrey and the tomato one, we would reduce our what they call blossom end rot, although we still have some. Here's a classic example of what blossom end rot looks like. Okay, depending on how bad the particular tomato is infected, you might be able to cut, like in this case, if I cut off the bottom of it, the rest of the tomato is probably still fine for sauce or something like that. But I've only had a handful of those, and typically where I used to get a lot of blossom end rot would be on these large brandywines, or the slicing tomatoes seem to really be susceptible to it. And it looks like the calcium, liquid calcium that we put on, plus we sprayed, I don't know if you guys remember, we did a video back in July where we were kind of goosing it with water-soluble calcium as a foliar feed too. So I just wanted to make sure I covered my bases and get as much calcium into the plants as I possibly could. And that seemed to really make a difference. So we've got very little loss related to that. And the fruits actually have very good flavor.
Really good flavor.
Yeah.
And we're preserving all of them as much as we can because we had a bad year last year.
Yeah.
What happened last year?
Well, the major thing that happened last year is the deer got in and they damaged the plants to the point where we lost a lot of production. And this year we kind of reformulated things and we figured out how to make like a curtain deer thing that would drop over the trellis so the tomato plants could grow underneath the net being pinned to the trellis itself. And that way the deer couldn't get to them. Frustrated the heck out of them, I could tell, because they munched on a lot of things around them that that weren't protected, like nasturtiums and things of that nature. But
our pumpkins.
But they couldn't get to these guys, which is I think the biggest difference. And then last year we didn't have the tomato fertilizer applications that we did this year. So I think that also made a big difference. We got a lot better growth out of these tomato plants and we got a lot more fruit set. So I'm going to keep on the same fertilizer regime. We used the JMS also with it in the earlier part of the season, although it kind of backed off on adding JMS once we stopped fertilizing and watering. So I think these guys have performed really well. And this is the third year of raising tomatoes in the same place. So this is one of those things where people say, oh, you got to rotate your crops. And I'm kind of a firm believer that if you really pay attention to the soil, that you don't necessarily need to do that. Like I said, and the plants I see no disease on the plants. I mean, they're naturally senescing because of the time of the year, but we didn't get any blight or anything, or leaf curl or anything like that. And we've had a lot of that because we've had a lot of hot weather, which can stress tomato plants pretty good and cause the leaves to curl. And even in the hottest weather that we had a good 10 days of over 100 degrees, and they just didn't respond that way. They stayed really well hydrated and they just kept growing like crazy. So
what are the ways that we're preserving them?
We're going to be using 3 ways, because the other thing we don't picture here is we have a big crop of cherry tomatoes to pick tomorrow. And cherry tomatoes, we're going to be drying those guys in our dehydrator and use those during the course of the season as like additions to sauces and things of that nature to kind of give things an extra boost. But the major thing that we're doing with these guys is the juicier ones, like these big guys here, I'm going to be making into a basic sauce, which in this particular sauce is an Italian tomato sauce, meaning we added Italian spices to it, like oregano's and basils and things of that nature.
No other vegetables were added.
No, we didn't. No, there were no onions or anything like that. We're going to save that. We're trying to get it kind of like just the basic flavorings on it so that you have more flexibility when you cook to decide,
Right.
what you want to put more garlic or whatever in it. And that was probably going to account to about 30% of what we're going to make. And then the vast majority, the rest of it is, and by the way, both these sauce and the diced tomatoes are pressure canned. We're not water bathing. Then this guy here is diced tomatoes, and this is kind of a base. There's no seasoning to it. There's a little salt added to it, but there's no seasoning to it. And what we're using that for is if we want to make more sauce for some specific thing, we can use it and cook it down from there. This is kind of like a base point. So what we're trying to do is preserve it to give us the most flexibility to whatever you want to cook with, and not so much that it's a ready to eat meal, although you could eat this stuff. I mean, it's already canned and cooked.
No ketchup.
No, we're not making ketchup now, but we may make ketchup later, and we can make ketchup easily from, taking some of these diced tomatoes and then add to it our dried cherry tomatoes, which are making a thick paste. Okay, one of the other things that we're doing too is we're using the skins from these tomatoes, because all of these products that we're putting into the jar, we're slipping the skins off. So instead of wasting those skins, we're putting them on our dehydrator and making basically a dehydrated tomato skin material that you can add to as a thickening agent to, if you're making a pesto sauce or a spaghetti sauce or something of that nature. It'd also be very useful too, again, to like if we want to make a ketchup or something like that, to add this to it as a thickening agent. These skins, once you grind them up, we grind them up in a little Cuisinart blender, and they dissolve right into the sauce. You don't taste the skin or anything like that, but they have a great flavor to them. And this is dehydrated skins from 20 pounds of tomatoes. So it doesn't take a lot of space.
In our smallest jars.
It says in the smallest jars. I mean, they dry up really small. So tomatoes, typically have a lot of water to them, and that's just, so the only thing that's really getting wasted, if you want to say return to the compost pile, is the core on the inside and the top. And that is it. The rest of it, we're putting away for use this winter.
So this is, all in all, was a great season for tomatoes. I was really nervous that it wasn't going to be a good season because we were so late.
Yeah, luckily we've had a great fall. I mean, sometimes in fall you can start early with the fall rains, and this year we haven't. So that made a big difference. Yep. So once we finish with, putting stuff away, we also make sure we just label our lids and kind of the date. So, you can keep your stock rotated, and you kind of, if you're canning a lot of different tomatoes, pretty soon, it's a jar of red stuff.
So the thing that we'll have to determine once we get it all processed, and preserved, is how much will we need through the winter and early spring that will take us to this time next year.
Yeah, and you may notice too that we're not putting things in quarts because there's only the two of us. So what we're trying to do is get this down into like meal size usage.
Yeah, so that stuff doesn't get stuck in the back of the fridge. Right. Going, whoa. So
that's kind of the focus for us. But if you had a bigger family, you'd be doing like wide mouth quarts, like crazy. So, but so the whole point on what we're trying to do is put up enough tomatoes that kind of give us something from our garden for, we could do it at least once or twice a week for several months, probably 4 or 5 months.
We're trying to eat seasonally too, so we'll hope this takes us as far into next year, spring and summer, until other things are available. Yeah,
kind of like what we found was when we're doing the diced tomatoes, to get it, by the time you get it into the jar and everything, it takes about 3/4 of a pound of these guys after you core them and cut anything away you need to cut away if you need to, which isn't much, but something like that I'd have to. And so we're going to have enough put up, I think, by the time we get finished with the garden season this year, that we'll easily have enough for a couple jars a week, or take some jars out, to make a ketchup or other kind of sauce.
Right.
That maybe it doesn't have an Italian seasoning base to it. So this has been a really good year.
Yeah, it was slow to start, but
Yep.
some things have worked out great and some things not so much.
Right.
But this was one of those that has been really great.
And again, the nice thing about this is on our last picking, we're going to set some of these guys aside to get seed for next year. And that way we can just kind of keep it going. You don't have to keep buying new seed for these same varieties.
For new seed, just something new, maybe new that I'd like to try that's tasty.
Yeah.
Because some of these are a little bit new to us.
And some of them, like we were going to try the mortgage lifter maybe next year.
Yeah, something really big. Big tomato.
So the only one that you really can't do it to is this F1 hybrid Oregon Spring, but everything else, you know, if you wanted to kind of stay, and that's kind of the thing we're looking for is what are the tomatoes that work best for us in our climate.
Yeah.
And so we'll always kind of keep experimenting with a little bit different ones, but you know, so far from a paste standpoint, I think the Amish paste works pretty good, and it's nice and meaty. But from a productivity standpoint, interestingly enough, the Grand Nero seems to set more tomatoes. So I don't know, maybe throw weight ends up, you know, equalizing out with, you know, quantity. I don't know. So
Good tomato harvest
Yep.
that we just wanted to share because that's what we're working on.
Yep. So thanks for watching, folks, and I hope you watch. I really do. Anyway, thanks a lot. You guys, you know, appreciate you watching the videos, and as always, stay safe out there, take care, and we'll catch you on the next video. Bye-bye.
Bye.